Welcome everyone to Gems from the Wisdom Traditions. And we're very pleased this week to have with us, and this, by the way, is the week of right speech from the Eightfold Path of the Buddhist tradition. And yet we are seeking our inspiration today for right speech from someone who I believe truly embodies it in her daily practice, our Kumuhula Mālia Helelā. And she will be kicking off our group conversation today with a talk entitled, "In the Language There is Life, Ika Olelo no ke ola." And Mālia is someone who has studied the hula tradition since she was 7 years old, and someone who has deeply steeped herself in that concept of aloha, which is one of the really key ingredients in my experience to the entire Hawaiian culture and tradition. So Mālia, if you could help us off with this idea of right speech, with how the Hawaiian tradition holds speech.
Hello, everybody. I just want to welcome you all to Waikakalaua, which is a small section in what we now know as Mililani. And in the Hawaiian worldview, place is very important. I am coming to you from the exact center of Oahu, between the mountain ranges of the Ko'olau and the Waianae. And I hope from this central point, I can offer some means of discussion for today. Okay, so the topic of words and speech is very, very important to me, and I'm so happy that I'm able to share with you with my mom here present and my Auntie Donna, I think. One story about our family that I was raised up with is that one of my tutus always felt like maybe somebody took her voice, like there was some kind of a curse or jealousy that took her voice when she was a younger one. I guess when she was an adult. And just knowing that that was part of my family story, whether or not it's true or not, I feel has kind of had an impact in me over the years. I have had times in my life, cultural times where I needed to chant, for example, where I felt like maybe I didn't have the place to speak, or I didn't want to speak, or I just lacked the voice. And so I think that my life journey through being a kumu and a mom and a wife and a citizen of this earth is really centered on finding my voice, claiming my voice, and finding ways to share not only my voice, but other voices together. And so I just wanted to share that little bit of my family history before I launch into my talk, because I feel that I'm somebody who has really given a lot of thought to the power of words, the power of language, and the power that we all have to speak. Okay, so I'm going to begin by sharing a document. This is a prayer that was shared to me by my Oli Kumu John Keola Lake. I had the opportunity to do a performance, a hula performance that required Oli, and I did not feel confident in being able to do that. This was for a Merry Monarch hula competition as a soloist. And so I sought out additional training in Oli, in Hawaiian chanting, and I received the blessing of my hula teacher to study chant. And this is one of the early chants that I learned, and it's incredibly powerful to me. It is entitled A-E-O-A, and Eo is a hawk. And so I'm just going to go through the English first. I think it's really valuable to have a little bit of understanding of what I'm chanting before I actually do. And so, O Eo, O hawk, O ku, O bird, the prayers are combined toward hakalau. The royal one strives toward uli via muttering, via rumbling, the rustling above, the rustling below, rolling north, rolling to the right, rolling south or to the left. The wind rises, the heavens break, thunder rumbles across the heaven. Great lightning flashes zigzag across the heavens. The heavens answer, and the people live. bringing skill, insight, and mana, that the world may continue. The words of the many chiefs and the place where that word has been placed. Awe descends upon me, completed, the prayer's kapu is freed. So this English translation is by Sam Gaughan, who is a student of John Lake. And what I really want to impart about this particular chant is that we are striving for this high place. There's the hawk that is poised, has this very deep and clear view out. We have the gathering of the prayers and hakalau, and then we have all of these rumblings, this roaring. It's kind of neat. I've got rumblings and roarings right next door. This kind of chaotic sense of thunder and lightning and rolling sound. And yet through all of that, there's this mysterious source of a thought. And that when we are able to give voice to our thoughts, that is where the power lives. So when we can take any idea, capture it into the words where the words are placed, then we can really find the power of it. And so this is E Ioe. He Ioe, Ioe, Kue Manue. Ke alua kune ka pulea hakalau. Ulia kalania, ulia namuya nawe. Ka nehe iluna, ka nehe ilalo. Ka'akau ka'ahema kuma kani haikalani he kili ka'aikalani kawila nuima ke haikalani pane kalani e ola ke kanaka o mai koloea ka ike ka manaia e ka honuala o vahala wali o kahia vaihoa e ka hua o lelo eli eli kaumai mama wano ai. And 2 claps to close. And so with this prayer, I feel like it probably was one of my first true teachings of the power of word, that we can take an idea and the energetic movements of nature and capture it into a word. And where that word is placed is where we find power. I'd like to follow with another prayer. This is Pule Mauliola. And this is a prayer that I have chosen for healing. Now, keeping in mind that there are so many traditions in hula, in Hawaiian chanting, different families have different traditions. And this prayer is one that I, in this modern day, have changed and adjusted. And this is something that is not only recognized as a traditional practice, but it is welcomed. We take chants that have some type of powerful aspect, and in a spirit of humility, we recognize that maybe we don't understand exactly what is contained in all the layers of this chant. And so we are encouraged and able within a cultural practice to change and adapt a chant so that we understand it, so that there's just a clear channel of thought between the words and what I am delivering through my chant. And so this one is generally a chant of balance. I'm going to go through once again the English, and with the language of this chant, I want to see if we can all start to create a sense of space. And so this chant to me recognizes that our words can define spaces. So we address Eo Umau Kia Imai Kopomai to my guardians from the remote past. Inana Yamaya Ho'ola, look down upon me and grant healing. From above to below, from inside to outside, from one corner to the other corner, from the mountains to the sea, from the east to the west, from the zenith to the horizon, from the roots to the very tips of the leaves. Between all of these pairs of opposites, we find our center, where we are guarded by and cared for by our guardians from the first line. A paleaku is to ward off any trouble or trouble of any kind. That's the pilikia. Hiki mauliola, until we can achieve well-being and balance. Mama Wanoa is the traditional close. And as a group, I'm going to call for two claps at the end. That's just a close to this prayer. And so, even though I feel like in speaking these points of opposites, it's like I'm sending spokes into space, what we're doing is really creating a sphere. We're creating the space around us that is defined by these extreme points that to me allows me to find that balance point in the center. Okay, so imagining the space around us. E umau kia I mai ka po mai na na ia mai a ho ola. Mai luna lalo mai lokua waho mai kahiki hia kahiki hi. Mai ka uka he kai.
Ai,
Mai
ai
ki na
ke,
e komohana mai ka hooku ia ka hala vai. Mai ke kumua ka velau. Kia I ia, malama ia. E pale aku ina pilikia hiki maoli ola. Mama wanoa. And two claps to close. So I think that I just wanted to start with those two examples of chants that use language and words to define space, as in the second one, but also to create a place where we can put our thoughts. So the first chant, we have this perspective of the hawk, which is the only Hawaiian predator, unless you count humans. It is the only Hawaiian predator, and as a hawk, it has this vision. It has precision in how it hunts. And so that is something that we're striving toward. And it kind of sits above all of the chaos of the thunder, the lightning, the rolling sound and rumblings. And if we can make our way through all of that chaos, we can find a place to put our thoughts into words. And in that, we can find so much power. In Hawaiian history, ours is a culture of, it's an oral culture. We did not have a written language until the 1800s. And so I think that as a culture, the importance of words is magnified because we didn't have a place to write something down so that we can remember it later. Any knowledge that was passed down from alohe alo, from face to face, from a teacher to a student, from a family member to another family member. There was a direct transference of knowledge through words and through language from one culture to the other. Now, this had a very dramatic disruption in the 1860s. We call that the population bottleneck, where we went from upwards of 1 million people down to tens of thousands. And so it's estimated that at the, at the peak of that population bottleneck that we had, we lost 19 out of 20 Hawaiians. And at the same time that we're losing our population, we were introduced to the written word. And we saw a period of our history where there was an absolute profusion of Hawaiian language newspapers that had an abundance of letters to the editor, editorials, a lot of discourse, people writing into the newspaper saying, oh, you know that story you published? Well, I'm not familiar with that. My family in Kona knows the story in this way. And so what used to be a culture and a tradition that was passed face to face had its first moments being captured into the written word. And so I think that especially because the Hawaiians we knew that we were losing a lot of our population. We knew that elders were passing away without passing on a lot of their knowledge. There was such, I think, just a nationwide sense of wanting to record stories and understanding the power in not only writing but reading, learning knowledge as well. And so I've mentioned this a few times. Hawaiians learn to read around, like, a whole village would come to learn around a single book that we learn to read from all different directions. So if you imagine a crowd gathered around a single book, people would be learning how to read from, you know, whatever perspective they could actually see the page. And so we had this period of our history where we were now taking words, placing the power of these words, defining our space, and starting to lay them down on paper. And so the last part that I wanted to share with everybody today is now taking this power of the word that has been transferred to paper and seeing how these words can take us through space. So we kind of defined our space with all the opposites, and now we're going to kind of take you through space. And so I have two final things that I want to share. One is a hula kahiko. It's a traditional hula. It's a seated hula that takes us around the Big Island. And then the last one, I'm going to play a song. It's a modern song. It's called He Nani Ka'ala. And I'm going to put the words up. I hope we can all sing together. Okay, but let me just share my screen one more time. And let's take a look at Ahilo Au. Okay, so here I don't have the translation, but maybe you can follow along and see these we can see the capitalized places hilo, wailuku, third verse haili, next verse panaeva, we have leleivi, molokai, and a Mauna Loa. This one I'm not going to chant, but Mauna Loa is part of that journey. And finally, haina, we tell the story for liho liho. So I just wanted to show you on the screen how we're going from place to place. And this is, I'm going to come out of this share. This is a traditional measure, a means of not only getting to visit places in our mind, but a way of passing down information about different areas. And so it literally is like we're going on a journey from Hilo and going around to these different places on the Big Island. Okay, so Hilo Au. This is a hula noho, so I'm able to do this for you without any other instrumentation other than my hands, creating music on my body. Ahilo. Ahilo auela ho'olu lukalehuala. Ahilo auela ho'olu lukalehuala. Awailu kula kalua kanakala. Awailu kula kalua kanakala. Aha iliaula kekula manula. Aha iliaula kekula manula. Apana evala kamoku lehuala. Na evala kamoku lehuala. Alele ibiaula ike kaila. Alele ibiaula ike kaila. Amolo kaila keala kahila. Amolo kaila keala kahila. Haina mai kapuana la no kalani no hei no ala. Haina mai kapuana la no kalani no hei no ala. Hei no ano liho liho. So I think that going from capturing the words to using words to define space, now we're taking words to move through space. And I think that that's part of what I love so much about storytelling and about hula. It's the words potential to take us places. So even though we're each sitting in our own respective homes, we can kind of travel together, which is such a miraculous thing. Okay, I'm going to share my screen one last time, and I'm going to share with you He Nani Ka'ala. And so this is in a traditional it's in a traditional format, although it's going to be set to music. I'm going to play my ukulele, and it's a very repetitive type of a melody. And so maybe if you don't mind, If you're not already muted, if you can mute yourself, just because I would love to sing together in real time, but the way that the internet lags, we would all be singing at different times. Okay, ready? Oya. Hey, Nani. Oh, hang on, different key. Here we go. He nani ka ala lai la lai lai kua hivi nani oe lai la lai lai. He nani ka ala lai la lai lai kua hivi nani oe lai la lai lai. Lai la lai lai is like tra la la. Inu uanu au lai la lai lai kamakani ko ola lai la lai lai. Inu uanu au lai la lai lai kamakani ko ola lai la lai lai. So we're on Oahu, and now to Kailua, which is where I grew up. I Kailua au lai la lai lai huki mai ka ulua lai la lai lai. I Kailua au lai la lai lai huki mai ka ulua lai la lai lai. Now let's all go to Renee's house in Kane Ohe. I Kane Ohe au lai la lai lai I ka ohe kaulana lai la lai lai. I Kane Ohe au lai la lai lai ka ohe kaulana lai la lai lai. Okay, next up is He'eia. He'eia lai la lai lai. He'ea eke aloha lai la lai lai. He'eia lai la lai lai. He'ea eke aloha lai la lai lai. Now Waiahole, famous for its taro and kalo. Iwaiahole au lai la lai lai. Hikanaka ki hole. Ooh, flirtatious man there. Iwaiahole au lai la lai lai. Hikanaka ki hole lai la lai lai. This story is told from the perspective of a young lady. She's looking for her man. I think she's going to try it Waikane. Iwai kane au lai la lai lai. He kane hana nui lai la lai lai. Iwai kane au lai la lai lai. He kane hana nui lai la lai lai. Oh, one of my ancestors found herself a hardworking man in Waikane. Okay, hi Ina. Aina ka ala lai la lai lai. Kua hivi nani oe lai la lai lai. Aina ka ala lai la lai lai. Kua hivi nani oe lai la lai lai. Walava. So we've gone for a trip down the windward side from Kaala, which is actually the highest mountain on the Waianae Range down in the west, through Nu'uanu over to Kailua, past Kaneohe, heading up toward the North Shore. And so I hope you've enjoyed having a virtual holo holo, a little travel with me through music and words. And I think we can open up now for some discussion. So I'm going to pass it over to Renee.
Hello, Mālia. That was absolutely delightful and really showed not only the lightness, the joyful Hawaiian heart, but also really the spiritual depth of the Hawaiian heart. Let's put it that way. I'm wondering, from all that you have studied from the Hawaiian tradition about the power of the word and of speech, what have you also gathered in regard to your own personal use of speech in daily life? I just noticed that you're so masterful about it. And maybe unconscious even.
Thank you. I think that in the best case, we can be informed by our history. We can be informed by legends and stories that we're raised with. The thing that first comes to mind is my practice of lomi lomi. And so in lomi lomi is Hawaiian massage. And I have been really cultivated is a good word for it, but all of my teachers have really given rise to the sense of how powerful our words are. And so, for example, if I'm working on somebody who has really tight shoulders, I would never say, "Oh, dang, your shoulders are tight." Like, I just would never ever say that, because there's this idea, ha upu upu, which is to the implantation of an idea into another person that can grow. And so I'm not going to implant a sense of, oh, you're broken into my client, because I can be massaging them the whole time they're thinking, oh my gosh, she said I'm tight. That must mean I'm really tight. She knows what she's talking about. I'm broken. Whereas if we can use our words and understand that we can implant ideas, why not use all the good things? So I'll say, wow, your muscles are really wrapping your bones. Your muscles are protective. They're doing their job. You're in a safe space here, so let's just let your bones sink into the table. You know, using this imagery of healing and positivity, and making that conscious choice that the words I use have the potential to then grow beyond what I've said. And so, in addition to that, specifically to Lomi Lomi, I use a lot of imagery from nature. And so there was a woman who was recorded by Mary Kavena Pukui. I forget her name, but she lived on Maui. And so this must have been maybe in the 1950s about. And she was a Lomi Lomi practitioner. Her name was Emma Olmsted. And she was recorded by Mary Kavena Pukui performing a Lomi Lomi massage, where the whole time, just like the kahiko hula that I danced and the hula that, or the mele that I sang, she took the person through this journey, relating their arms and their bones and the slopes of their body to the beautiful mountains, to the softness of the clouds, using this imagery of nature to then also provide treatment, not just with the physical lomi lomi of the hands, but also providing treatment using the words and the imagery. So it's on my professional bucket list to listen to that recording or read the actual transcript. I've only had it described to me. But I can only imagine how lovely it must be to receive a treatment that takes into account not only my physical body, but even the imagery. It's cultivating an imagery through precise and specific language.
Beautiful.
That's quite powerful and wonderful what was just being said about implanting the seed and so forth. I wonder how much of this gets conveyed to children in Hawaii now. Is it through parents, or how does this wonderful themes you've been presenting, do they get presented to children in Hawaii, or in what form does that occur?
That's a really good question. I think that it is happening more and more. There are more Hawaiian language schools. There's more Hawaiian curriculum being taught. There are more Hawaiian scholars that are graduating and becoming educators themselves now more than ever. I was born in 1978, and my dad has told me many times how happy he is that I was born a girl. In the women's rights movement, social rights, Hawaiian Renaissance, kind of a lot of things were starting right when I was born. And certainly in my high school, I took Hawaiian language my freshman year. I remember in the course catalog, there were only a handful of options available to me to choose for Hawaiian language. And by the time I graduated, I was a freshman in 1993, which was the 100-year anniversary of the overthrow of the Hawaiian government by America. And so even within my high school years, there was this resurgence of national pride and intellectual inquiry about, Hawaiian practices. And so from my freshman year and only having a few classes to choose from, my senior year, they had hired a dozen new teachers, and there were literally dozens of Hawaiian language classes available in just a few short years. And so my generation is one of the first generations to then go on to college. to then become professionals and start to share a lot more Hawaiian culture. And I had mentioned the population bottleneck in the 1860s. The Hawaiian language newspapers are a tremendous resource that have only been translated to a very small degree. A lot of the Hawaiian reference books were written by a very few people from a very few sources and with a very narrow perspective. Now, in any of our local bookstores, you can see dozens, hundreds of books written by Hawaiian scholars that are taking these looks back at our history and reviving through the Hawaiian language resources that we never even dreamed were available to us. And so I think that we still have a really far way to go, but at least in my lifetime, I have personally seen a growing interest and means of expression for these Hawaiian points of view. And I think that there's a Hawaiian scholar, her name was Pilahi Paki, and she's most famous for writing the Aloha chant, which is the basis of the Aloha spirit law. You may or may not have heard here in the state of Hawaii, we have a Hawaii revised statutes from the 1970s, right around when I was born, that have an Aloha spirit law. It uses this chant and the words of the scholar Auntie Pilahi Paki to say that aloha it's a cultural treasure that is to be shared with the world. You know, all of our judicial systems, and you know, it has a whole list of all of the public, you know, entities that should be operating from a place of aloha. And this is in the 70s, and not very many people know about it. But Pilahi Paki said that there will come a time in the future where the world will need something, and what they're going to need is aloha, and that it'll be for us to share aloha with the world. And so I really hope to see more avenues of sharing this, because I think it is the universal language of compassion. Like, I know so many of you are scholars who have studied this concept of compassion. And I believe that it's one of the best English words to describe aloha, because compassion is understanding the suffering of another together with wanting to render aid. So it's not just sympathy or even empathy, it's empathy plus wanting to help. It's a verb. And so I think that people understand empathy. They understand compassion. I hope that everybody in the world has been the recipient of compassion at some point in their life, so that they can understand how powerful it is to receive it and be inspired to give it. I've been the recipient of just a deluge of aloha from my mom and just a deluge of aloha from my dad, who's not, you know, he's not blood Hawaiian, but he has that sense. And so I think that that Hawaii really does have different ways of sharing this universal concept of compassion.
Thank you very much. Wow.
Thank you.
Mālia, this is beautiful. This is Veena. So it's such a blessing to hear your voice and to talk about the world have sacred power. In the Indian traditions also, the idea of the world comes out of speech. Because what you think about when we speak, we create. I'm wondering if you can recommend, I'm very interested in this topic, any book, any paper, any written literature I can read and think about how these two systems they share the basic principles. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. That's an excellent question. There are so many books. Ones that are kind of flashing to mind. There's a book, the name of it. It's a book about the traditions of Pele, the fire goddess Pele. I want to say it's Voices of Fire, but in it, it's a lot of Hawaiian scholars have taken their research from the universities and published it as books. There's lots and lots of them now. And this particular one takes a look at the traditions of the fire goddess Pele and use these different stories to inform modern day. I will have to follow up with everybody here with the name of that book.
Ike loaned it to me. It's Voices of Fire, Reweaving the Literary Lay of Pele and Hi'iaka.
Thank you, Noah. That's exactly it. Reweaving the literary lay.
And you were talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
and Ike had a copy.
Excellent. Another one of my classmates, Kamana Beamer, he wrote a book called No Mako Ka'aina, I believe. He takes a look at land use and like land law over time. And so it's a look at what is a Hawaiian sense of land stewardship. What happened when land ownership came, and how did we get to where we are today? And I think that that is a very interesting cross-section to look at Hawaiian thinking, because it's looking at one of the manifestations of Hawaii, which is the land, and how the people, integrate with the land over time. No mako ka'aina. I would also recommend both King Kalakaua. He wrote a series of stories, or he published a series of legends about Hawaii. And in the foreword, it talks about King Kalakaua in his time having traveled all around the world and experienced and seen the different kingdoms and nations and peoples around the world. He sought to elevate Hawaii's culture to be on par with any tradition in the world. And so he published a series of legends and stories that he likened to Homer and the Iliad, and these epic tales that are set here in Hawaii. And his sister Lili'uo Kalani, she was our final queen, our final monarch of Hawaii. She wrote Hawaii's Story by Hawaii's Queen, I believe. Yeah, so it's in her own words. In her own words, a story. And then my current book that I'm reading is Reclaiming Kalakaua, which is, again, a scholar publishing her research, looking at what we've been told about King Kalakaua, that he bankrupted Hawaii by building the palace, that he was a playboy, that he was frivolous, and actually looking through the Hawaiian language newspaper resources to see that actually he was a man of science. He loved photography and science and astronomy, and yet at the same time was seeking to revive hula and Hawaiian means of healing. He was truly a Renaissance man. So that one is in my hands right now, is Reclaiming Kalakaua.
I wonder, Lenny is visiting us from Colombia, and I don't know whether I would be putting her on the spot too much to ask whether you might have similar traditions from Colombia.
Yes, we have, but we don't have strong traditions because we are a diverse culture. So only people who grow in those places know much about it, because we are, so the white people came, the indigenous people was here, and the African people came. So we are a mixture of all the cultures. So there are these traditions, but not everybody knows about it, just the people who live near those locations. Maybe because the diversity, I don't know. But yes, there are so many traditions, Aboriginal traditions about that. But it's so beautiful. Here where I live northern Colombia. There are indigenous that they have their own tradition, their own form of living, and here the government respect that. so they can decide and act and live by their tradition, their traditions.
Does any traditional story come to your mind? And maybe it won't, but just about the power of speech, talking, calling, singing, something about the voice?
Well, I think right now I don't have any story, but I really believe the power of words, because when we speak, we embody what we speak. The words that we say is like that words live inside of us. So I completely agree with Maya about always stay focused in the positive, because if we stay focused in positive words, we attract those words to our life. But I think there are many stories about nature and how Aboriginal people connect with the sun, with the mountains, with the rivers. And it's very beautiful because to know all those stories and the romanticism about it is so beautiful. So we need to connect more with those traditions, I think.
Thank you so much, Lenise.
You're welcome.
We had a speaker on the Native American tradition in April who spoke of how important it is when we live in a land to learn the language, at least to some extent, like the names of the animals, the names of the plants of that land, in the language of the most recent culture that had a deep connection with nature, who were custodians of that land and everything that grew in it. And so it sounded as if the power of language was such that when we call something by the name that for hundreds, perhaps longer, thousands of years, those animals, those plants have been known by those names, we come to be more closely aligned. We can more closely assimilate the symbolism of each of those plants and animals and what they have to teach us. Probably the different, for example, medicinal qualities of those plants becomes more available as we become more intuitively aligned with them through the language that those living beings are used to being addressed in. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts on that, and including Lenise and Mālia, of course.
I was exactly thinking the same way. Like in Japan, like we used to more connected to nature, and then we believe in like everything, like God, everything has God. Like there's a God in mountain, God in ocean, everything has a God. So we treat everything with respect. So, but like me, like young people grew up in city, we're so disconnected from the nature. So now living in Hawaii, the nature is more close, like to me. I feel close to nature more living in Hawaii. So now I'm more back to like connecting nature, respectful, and then be in the nature. And then there's a in Japanese word that a kotodama, every word has spirit in it. So in Japan, like it was like that, I think, because connected nature so much in the past is also the word. All the word have a spirit. So you have to respect, treat each word with respect, I think. So I think when people are connecting to nature more, I think you're gonna be aware of those stuff again. So I feel like more understand what Mālia is saying and connecting to the nature more here in Hawaii.
I also want to say that I think each animal, each plant, have their own quality. So also they can teach us their quality. For example, as Maya was talking about the hawk, he can teach us like a higher perspective, or a tree can teach us how we can ground with earth. So now I think we can align with each characteristic or archetype of animals and plants to connect more with nature, and using the power of chanting and the words to attract that to our life.
Beautiful.
Jim is gone, but I wanted to just mention a recent incident that happened that I think touches on what he was asking. How do we teach our kids? How do we teach people? And that has to do with a YouTube video, or I forget what it was, of some woman who visited Iolani Palace, and she sat on an area that was not supposed to be even, it was blocked off, and it went viral, and they were supposedly, the photographer was getting death threats. They were very obstinate. They're not going to be sorry for anything. They don't care what anybody thinks. And they showed on the news Kumuhina, who is a very well-respected Kumu, and she was saying that it's wrong what they did. They disrespected our culture. They showed lack of regard for our heritage, our history, our sacred places, because Iolani Palace is a sacred place. But she said she feels that Hawaiians, we've said kapu aloha, meaning only love in response to any kind of outrage, violence. We do not continue that violence. And that was very evident on Mauna Kea. And Mālia can talk about kapu aloha.
Thank you, Mom. Yeah, just speaking briefly to kapu aloha. So it's kind of acknowledged to be a modern usage of the words. Basically, it's saying that everything that we do may be intentional and through that lens of aloha. And specifically up at Mauna Kea, the occupation at Mauna Kea, right at the base of the access road that was convened to stop further construction up on the summit. That occupation was done as a ceremony, and so 3 times a day, in the morning, at midday, and at dusk, there was a protocol of chanting and hula, and a reiteration with a very big sign of the standards of kapu aloha, that anything we say be said with respect, that there be no weapons, that lights out, everybody is quiet, the mountain goes to sleep, and we go to sleep too. It was just this constant reiteration in a ceremonial space that we have to watch our, not even just our language, but how we comport ourselves. Every aspect has to come through this space of aloha. And so it was incredibly humbling for me to be there and to see it, not just talked about, but actively lived, by thousands and thousands of people over time. So yeah, that is a modern iteration of kapu aloha. But thank you, Mom. Noah, did you have something you wanted to mention?
Oh, I was going to go off on a different track about how worldview is embedded in language. And one of the ways that it's really easy to see that is when you look at the words for relationships and the third person referrals to different people. So in different languages, you have gendered pronouns or no gendered pronouns. And one of the things for an English speaker learning Hawaiian that's really challenging is that there are so many different ways to say we, that expresses the different groupings and relationships amongst people. You know, and I've also studied Spanish as an English speaker. So I have a very, very clear sense for myself of how difficult the gendering of the whole language can be. And that like English has gendered pronouns, but for an English speaker learning Spanish, like every single word has grammatical gender, and that's a real challenge. Whereas in Hawaiian, the pronouns don't have gender. And so, you know, just thinking about different languages and different worldviews and how these things are expressed through language. I don't know if you want to talk about sort of relationship words, and you know, I mean, also in Hawaiian, like all the different relationship words that don't exist in English, and how that expresses a different worldview about how people are related.
Right, that is something that's really fascinating to me. There's one chant that that we're studying right now. It's a prayer for the moon that talks about granting healing ya kako, and kako is the widest sense of we. It's we including everybody, as opposed to mako, just us but not you guys, or lako, just them but not us. You know, there are, like Noah said, so many ways to define relationship. You know, that's not necessarily gendered, but it just helps for clarity. It just helps for clarity. And so one thing that I see often is people saying it's a kako thing. Like it's about us all. It's a kako thing. We're all kind of in this together. Yeah.
Well, I do want to wrap up by really extending to Mālia our heartfelt gratitude, I think, from each of us who's had the privilege of being here, of really being able to sense almost viscerally the power of the word. When Mālia chants, I almost always get what we call in Hawaii chicken skin. It kind of sometimes raises up the back of my neck, and sometimes it goes all the way to my bones. Truly, truly powerful use of the word, and always done with love. So that idea of aloha permeating our speech, that it can only come from deep within. It colors, I think, our minds, and then emits forth from our words. And from everything that we learn today in science, everything in this world that we think is a thing is actually vibration. There's no such thing as a thing. It's all vibration. And for that reason, it seems that the power of the voice is operating on the fundamental level of being of every person and every what we call object in this world. We're all made of vibration, so that it's kind of like a tuning fork. When somebody speaks clearly, when they have resonance, when they have love, aloha behind what they speak, that word travels out like a tuning fork, and anyone within earshot and beyond earshot, anyone within the range of that vibration, which actually extends out infinitely into the universe, that has the slightest bit of coadunition, that has anything in common with that person that's sending out that vibration, will begin themselves to vibrate in tune with it. So there is a tremendous degree of responsibility that we bring with us to our words, also knowing that once they go out, we never can recapture them and bring them back in. All we can do is send out another, better, higher vibration that will lift up what came before. And so we are just tremendously, tremendously indebted to Mālia for sharing the wisdom, not only of her tradition, but also that she has cultivated over a lifetime of the kind and gentle use of her voice. So thank you so much, Mālia. Just
Thank you, Renee.
an enormous privilege for us. We have with us still Maurice Bishop, who is tuned in from Santa Barbara, California. And he is going to be our lead speaker for next week. He is one of the members of the Institute of World Culture, which on July 4th, and next Saturday will be July 4th, celebrates the Declaration of Interdependence, the Declaration of Interdependence. And so he is going to speak to us on the idea of spiritual democracy from the traditions of the American revolutionaries, and before that, the tradition of the Native Americans, from whom the founding fathers garnered so many of their thoughts about what this new democratic people and its country was hoping to look like.
Do you think we have time for me to close out with one more Oli?
Oh, that would be so perfect.
Just one more. I was thinking, since I talked about the Aloha Spirit Law and the Aloha Chant, it just seems appropriate that that we maybe close with this. And so Pilahi Paki took the letters of Aloha and she assigned a meaning to each letter. So the A, Akahai, is kindness. The L, Lokahi, is unity. The O, Olu Olu, I translate as to have grace. The H, Ha'aha'a, is to have humility. And finally, Ahonui is to have patience. And so these are just some facets of what it means to have aloha, to live aloha, and to share aloha with everyone that we can. So this is, in conclusion, the Aloha Chant. Akahae na Hawaii, no kahia kulike, olu olu kamana o, ha'a ko kulana, ahonui alana kila, aloha mai na Hawaii, o ke aloha no kamea nui, e o mai e na Hawaii, na pua na lei na mamo, ala mai e ka lahui, laula a kaulana, o mai e ka lehu lehu, ha'ahe o oe Hawaii, anu ai o ke aloha, aloha e, aloha e, aloha e. Mahalo.
Great shares from Lenise and Eriko. Great suggestions
Thank you.
from Mary. We look forward to you next week, Marie.
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.